Thank you everybody. Thank you for coming. Thank you, Sue. Thank you, Anna. Thank you, my colleague Liz, for making this possible. And thank you everybody for showing up on a Wednesday evening. First of all, let's give it up to Professor Cornel West. I was reading his manuscript from the 1980s and the arguments he was making about pragmatism. And a few months ago, we had a dinner, and I asked him we were running through some of the notes I had taken from the book. And one thing that immediately shined through was consistency. The way he was then, the way he has been all through the years. It's rough either way, and the way he's even now today. And I think that's to his morality and as well as the consistency. I think we all deserve a great moment that we all live alongside him and his spiritual endowment, as well as his vision that is trying to go to the most oppressed people anywhere in the world. Thank you, Professor Cornel. I would also like to remember some of my inspirations. They are not with us. To begin with, Du Bois, I got intimately connected with him because, again, I took a class. Me and Mordecai, we was in the class. Magma was in the same class, where we studied for the whole semester to try to understand. And I think it's to the legacy of Du Bois, which his most favorite work, as he described, was The Dark Princess, the novel he wrote, where he takes an African-American character up into, getting and meeting a Indian girl, and of course the future that he imagines is about this black and kind of solidarity with India. And I think that's something that remains to be finished, that remains to be even inaugurated, that has not happened as much. We live again in the conflicted legacy of Malcolm X, who's again creative genius, and his tongue and his sharpness was just so powerful that it illuminated many lights beyond the boundaries of America. Martin Luther King Jr., for his admiration, nobody knows and much people don't know about it, is to the untouchables, to the Dalits in India, where he was when he went to India on the strip, he was extremely devoted to the struggle of Dalit people. And when he came back, he wanted to do an extensive study because he just saw the scourge of untouchability, which is naked eyes, and he couldn't just believe it. It was beyond the propaganda of Indian government. It was trying to promote India of a certain Gandhian land, which had its own problems and a lot of holes in its own makeup. I'd like to also remember the legacy of civil rights struggle, but also Ella Baker for contributing her genius to uplift the voice. And from where I come from is Dr. Ambedkar. His legacy lives in me. It was him that inspired a person like me who grew up in slums to even pursue higher education beyond primary education. And I think looking up to his resume, in 1913 comes to Columbia University, a first untouchable boy out of kind of nowhere, straight lands up here in Harlem, and the rest is history. I would also like to show you, and I talk about these two ladies, Saru and Chandra. Sarubai is my mother's mother, and Chandra is my father's mother. They were born as untouchables. They lived as untouchables, and they continue to live as untouchables. Their value was not considered at par. The dignity that the society would have granted to any woman in society was not given to them, and they had to fight multifold on a manifold level. She worked as a landless laborer throughout her life. She worked as a house cleaner, what we call as a manual scavenging job, cleaning people's toilets, and I had an incident with her which I'll briefly talk about, as well as Chandra. She is a little bit lettered. She studied until 4th grade in Marathi medium school. Chandra, on the other hand, couldn't go to school, worked as a house help, we call them servants in India, and did all kinds of lowly paid jobs. And I think they would not have imagined one of their succeeding generations would be someone who will author a book that will describe about an era as well as about an issue that has deeply impacted their lives as well as the lives of their mothers and their fathers and their ancestors. And I think it is through their legacy I derive inspiration. What happened when, as I was about 10-year-old child, I was hanging out with my grandma Saru, and Saru wanted to, Saru was too ashamed to share with me what she was doing for a living. And as a grandchild was visiting her, I was very curious, and she would just bribe me with some 10 paise, 50 paise to just avoid following her. But one day I was very much devoted to knowing what she's doing. So I secretly followed her. And guess what? I mean, she couldn't find me, I was there. And so I saw her through the gates, because the gate of the person she was working for was closed. She was working as a cleaner in the house. She was just cleaning the toilets. And then I immediately showed up as surprised, because there was a small gate where I entered through, and she was aghast. Her face was pale. She couldn't fathom that her grandson, who goes to an English-speaking medium school, is now seeing his grandmother cleaning someone else's toilet. And that fear of recognizing that someone from the family is also doing this kinds of job was very jarring. And then, as it happened, I had to pee. And she didn't wanted me to pee. She's like, it's okay, you can control. I said, no, I gotta go pee now. And finally she says, okay, go soon and come back soon. So I entered the bathroom, and I was probably there 30 to 40 seconds inside, but I could see her shadow. She was constantly, I couldn't understand, why is she patrolling while I'm peeing? It was less about patrolling me, it was more about the fear. What if the upper caste landlord who she worked for finds out that an untouchable boy is using the bathroom? At that 10 years old, this was this extremely poignant memory that kind of carried with me and always created this terror in my mind whenever I entered any bathrooms of any dominant caste people. And even now in America, when I'm going into the bathrooms, that memory somehow just triggers and kind of flashes. So I think it is to their legacy that I salute, and also want to give a shout out to my family. Yengdes, I will just, because they couldn't be here, no one has passport in my whole family, only I have. So I will just remember them, my dad, who's not with us, but Milind, Rohini, my mother, my uncles, Mohan and Deepak. I grew up in a joint family, 16 people, 30 by 40 plot. And you imagine how much problem one bathroom to be shared by 16 people. And of them, 6 children had to go to school early morning. And so you can see how we had to negotiate our bathroom timings and everything. And we, of course, we fought, especially the sick. And my siblings, Pranali, Samyak, Pawan, there are many, Harsh, Didi, and Nitin, and of course, Akash. So thank you, all of them, in their absence. If they would have been here, I would have just asked them to stand up. One of the questions that's constantly asked is, what is caste? How does one identify? So caste is, even if you have to describe it in a simple language, it's a hierarchical system. You are born into a caste. It's a status, and with that status, everything else follows. So if you are belonging, if your parents are from specific caste, you descend. You are not only born, but you exercise caste throughout your life. You are trained to be a particular caste person. Even in the ignorance or even in the innocence, the family as an institution teaches the child how to practice caste. And by that, they can be casteist, which is utilizing their caste to oppress somebody else, or using their caste to undermine themselves and their communities also. It works both ways. And I think that's why many times people say, especially among Indians, I don't know what my caste is. And I think that's the catchphrase, is because you never had to feel the caste and most likely belong to one of the dominant caste groups, because you never had to negotiate the way some of us had to dance around this issue of the caste. And caste privileges, caste doesn't only work with the oppressive side, it also works with the privileged side. And most often what happens is the fetishization of the Dalit body, the lower caste body, becomes so relevant that we overlook the privileges that people are deriving from the caste. And I think I like to put the lens on the privileged lot also, because it's upon making them defensive of their caste privileges, I think we can create more dialogue, or else my story, my lamentations, my cry will again become a literary genre. It will not contribute necessarily to immediate Dalit liberation or liberation of people who are oppressed in the caste. I will just run through some statistics for you to understand what is the status of Dalits. And when we say that SC, that means Dalits. It's a scheduled caste. So these are one of the top 2 institutions in India. This is basically equivalent of, we can't equate, but of course the Harvard's-like institutions. And you can see the representation. The general meaning the people who are belonging to the dominant caste, and the dominant caste people in India are less than 20%. So 20%, less than 20% people are about, you can say representation, while Dalits, as well as the STs are equivalent of Native Americans, the indigenous people, they are 0.2, as this is the faculties who are teaching in the colleges, and then you can see Dalit, they are not even 1%. This is the kind of, this is the status quo of India when we talk about how caste is played out and how caste is not played out. And this is engineering institutions. Again, it's like almost like MIT, Indian Institute of Technology, just remove the Indian and Massachusetts or any other technology. And there also you will see the kind of school representation of the people in the higher education. When a Dalit child enters a primary school, the enrollment rate is 80%. 80% of them are, 90%. By the time they graduate from primary school, that percentage comes down to 74%. By the time they are in the high school and they are graduating, it descends to 62%. And from 62%, when they go into college, that's a surprising figure, it drops down. It drops down to less than 20%. And so how many Dalits graduate with a university degree? Less than 4%. So we have less than 4% people like me who have degree from my kind of background, who have a higher education degree. Even if they go to college, many of them drop out, or we all know the institutional barriers that these institutions create for these people. Dalits also face the kind of gory atrocities that is unimaginable to its count. In the last 10 years, the statistics is just so the 746% of the crimes rose up. So now just add to that number. If we calculate in terms of numbers, it's more than 500,000 crimes that were officially reported. And in the Indian system, most often when you are undergoing any kind of oppression, you don't go to police because police is a caste state. They harass you. So those numbers are almost 3 times less than what we have. And in 10 years, if you have this much number, India is actually witnessing a genocide of people belonging to the Dalit caste. There is absolute deafening silence on this very important issue. Let's look at the glimpse of how a Dalit. So there are approximately 16, now it's 17 to 18%. In 1 year alone, 40,801 atrocities were committed against these people. Every 15 minutes, and again, there is another statistics if you somebody compiled. Every 4 hours, one Dalit is actually undergoing a very severe, violent crime. Every day, 2 Dalit women are raped. By the time we close our eyes and sleep, somewhere 2 Dalit women have been raped. Every week, 13 Dalits are murdered. So by the end of the week, the 13 slave Dalit bodies are there. In addition to that, the professional murders that take place, meaning Dalits are sent into manholes to clean other people's shit. Every 3rd day, when Dalit enters the manhole, comes out as a dead body. The family, the child, and we have right now glorification of untouchability. And Gandhi is a responsible person who ritualized and spiritualized manual scavenging. He said it's a spiritual act. Rather, Ambedkar asking to eradicate the untouchability and the problems associated with it, it was actually given a more legitimate stand. This is the condition of Dalits. If you look at the statistics of the crimes, more you can't see, but This is basically compiling of how difficult it is for one to be a Dalit in India, anywhere you live, of course, barring few states where there are not crimes as recorded as we can see. Let's talk about the incarceration rate. This is 2013. I also have 2018 data. The largest number of incarcerated people in prison belong to the Dalit community, more than the sharing population. Same goes with the Muslims and of course the Adivasis, the native Indians, as we see. The 2018 data is contrasting India and the US, and it's almost, and the SC stands for Dalit, and of course, as I've said earlier, the figurative representation continues. Dalits continue to be, when there is a crime committed against Dalits, the conviction rate is so little that almost nobody. If you look at, there was a case out of 10, there were only 2 people who were convicted and eventually acquitted by the court because of various state that doesn't consider certain evidences as credible. Now, when we talk about this issue, we also have to focus the attention how caste is benefiting the people. So when we talk about the class issues or the economic issues, when we have the Oxfam report talking about the richest Indians or the richest people within India, it also has a caste angle. So it's just not the rich people. These are upper caste rich people. For utilizing the caste privileges to actually draw upon the unpaid labor of these people who have been working for them for so long. If you look at the asset share, again, this population is less than 20%, but they have overwhelming asset share as it goes. And if you consider that with the Dalits and other caste people, we will continue to face these problems. The acquittal rate when it comes to the crimes that are committed against Dalits, this is how it was reported, and this is the state that was ruled by the current Prime Minister of India, who was the Chief Minister of the state. 95 out of 100, acquitted, plain black. And I think this keeps on coming to our face every time we are visiting this issue. Now one obvious question is, what about judiciary, right? It has to offer certain justice. This is what judiciary is comprising. The Supreme Court judges, only had so far since 70 years, 2 Dalit judges sitting on the Supreme Court bench. One is right now, and one was about 25 years ago. So this is the kind of upper caste males who again give a decision that is not at all relating to the Dalit welfare, or of course not understanding the lived reality, how we perpetuate such kind of oppressive orders. Why do we not know? Because the media plays an important role. Even in its progressive liberal framework, out of 121 newsrooms, 106 are actually occupied by people who belong to upper caste or the dominant caste. So even there, the person who's writing news or who's going to report news or who's going to file an op-ed for New York Times or Washington Post, these days you are reading quite a lot when it's coming to India, are not the people who are actually suffering, are the people who are actually benefiting out of the system. It's just that they have a liberal framework. It's almost like white people, white liberals talking about black oppression. Similarly, we have here. I personally know only 4 Dalit journalists who write in English language for 300 million Dalits. And now those 4, you must remember, they are 4 tiny drop. How much of a fear they must be living under. And there are few more who don't want to come out. Because one famous magazine writer who's a Dalit, nobody knows he's a Dalit. I will not tell his name. If people know, he says people will start then judging his writing because he's a Dalit, and that's why the whole program of his scholarship or his writing will be critically or will not appreciate it the way people are appreciating now. So he says, let's accept the way it is. The important aspect is people still believe untouchability is abolished. I don't think so. This is the recent research. It was collected 5 years ago from University of Maryland, and this is what it said. 50% of India openly acknowledged we practice untouchability. It's a criminal act, it's anti-constitutional, but they had no hesitation. These are, by the way, the voluntary responses, where people say we don't have problem practicing untouchability at all. And it was recorded there are 57 types of discrimination Dalit undergo. And these 57 types be even could be a normal insult, to mistreating, your servants, your chauffeurs, and all kinds of lower-paying jobs where you inflict a kind of dangerous situation for this kind of people who come from the backward or the lower caste background. Now we have this perspective, and when we think about that in a global perspective or in the perspective of US, we still have institutions and individuals justifying caste system. Within a broader framework of so-called Hindu ideology, people still have this nerve to justify how caste system was, or continues to be in a different way. There is no adequate effort from any religious institution in India, because temples, of course, occupy a lot of wealth. There is no temple in India right now that outrightly condemns untouchability. In fact, it practices untouchability. Even the president of India, who is a Dalit himself, was not allowed to enter a temple because he is a Dalit. He had to offer his prayers from at the doorsteps of the temple. And I think this is the serious situation where people have a very spiritual understanding of what caste is, or how this how this comes to exercise and how it comes into being. Yet people do not know how this continues to animate everyday realities of people who live on the bottommost part. And when we talk about caste, we are not talking only about the Hindu caste. Caste has managed to transcend into Islam as well as Christianity in India. So Muslims are 14% of India's population. Of them, 85% of the people are the people who can claim their background to the lower castes. Their ancestors converted few generations ago. So when we talk about the Muslim or Hindu violence, we are not talking about the people who are Muslim by faith, but we are talking about those people who constitute 85% of that corpus. It's the same people. They just happen to be Muslims, and they happen to be Dalits. Their origins are the same. Almost, if to put in analogy, a black Muslim or a black Christian. At the end of the day, the social locus is what it defines. Yet we continue to have debates where people talk about communalism, we talk about Hindu-Muslim violence, they talk about how Islam and how Hinduism are in conflict, yet they do not talk about how the people who constitute into making Islam or who constitute into making Hindu become what they are today. And Hindu again is a misnomer. It's a forcibly clubbed caste. The term Hindu came about in 1890s. Was brought by Arya Samaj. Before that, it didn't exist. It's a Persian word. But it was a political strategy to involve all other castes under one and to fight against the colonial regime. The Hindu was popularized. But in private practices, it's caste that's more important. When you come to marriage, they are looking for their not only caste but sub-caste. When they have to share the food or have more personal relationships, sub-caste matters a lot. Hindu just becomes a facade for one to hide one's caste privilege. And that's why Brahmins in India have so effectively managed. Less than 3% of the population Brahmins control more than 41% of India's resources. Among the editors that we know, that this is the latest data, they have not mentioned how many Brahmins control, but research before that shows 85% of the editorial jobs in the media are controlled single-handedly by Brahmin castes. Yet we do not have a focus on how Brahmin supremacy takes place in our everyday operations. We have a question phenomenon of Hindu supremacy. I don't think it's an adequate framework for us to understand, to go into the root, because Hinduism again becomes a segment where Dalits are also Hindus. Does that mean Dalits are part of that Hindu supremacy? They don't have the power to inflict the supremacist values. It is the people who have been traditionally benefiting out of this system are the ones who are inflicting the Hindu supremacist values. And therefore, whenever we talk about Hindu, let's be very clear. It's not about Hindu as a category. It's about those specific castes and their location into the Hindu fold. Similar with Christianity. 74% of Indian Christians are Dalit Christians. So the Dalits who left the Hindu fold or the oppression that was imposed upon them, went to other religion, continued to be untouchables in the new faith too. That's why we have so many Dalit Christian organizations fighting for their rights. We have so many backward caste Muslim organizations fighting for their rights. Within the fight of Hindu Muslim or Hindu Christian, it is the elite caste who do not fight personally. It is the lower caste among Muslims, lower caste among Christians, lower caste among Hindus who are fighting amongst each other. If you go back few generations ago, probably they belonged to the same family. And I think this critical conversation doesn't feature. Why? Because the person who is parading communalism from the Muslim side, or the person who is parading this idea of religious violence from the Hindu or the Christian side, is the one most likely belonging to the upper echelons of the religious order. And in this makeup, the Dalit question remains very effectively submerged. That's why it's constant appeal that we are trying to make. The Dalits, which I develop in this book, is the notion of Dalit love. I was just thinking, I was looking through my grandma, looking through her face. Whenever I sit with her, my grandma has a habit of taking my hand into her hand, and then she just rubs her hand over my palm. And then her palm goes on my face, and that's the grandma's love. You can't escape that. And her wrinkled skin has seen so much. It's very resilient. And I asked her once, why do you do the way you do? Why do you not get agitated about these things? Because she is so conditioned about the caste system that if a person from a specific caste is coming in our neighborhood, she's already alarmed. She's already knows she has to behave certain way, she has to act certain way. She's a fighter, but yet the caste is conditioned in such a way that it's psychologically playing against her. And she is teaching me the same. She's like, don't mess up with those upper caste people. Because they have wealth. They have connections, the police belong to them, the administration belongs to them, that's the relatives that belong to them. And you gonna end up in prison. I grew up with 6 people, my friends. 3 of them are still in prison. One of them is working odd jobs. I was recently told he was charged under something and he's still battling a case. This is the reality of Indian Dalit life if you come from that kind of background. So my grandma always told me to make sure that I do not confront people, because it's not going to work. We're going to fight for justice, it's going to come back, and you're going to still suffer. It's going to be a psychological disaster for you, because I've seen that. Don't mess up. If they don't pay you, no problem. Go tomorrow. Because you got no options. And then, one thing that she taught me was that the Dalit community, as a community, has not given up on loving. The love ethic has remained so central for its survival that it has constantly been giving chances to the oppressor to correct its measures. I asked, for 3,000 years plus, the psychological trauma that we have been inheriting, how do you still manage to survive? How do you still manage to thrive? How do you still manage to compete? How do you still manage to wake up every day after reading about something or listening about some atrocity that has been inflicted upon your daughter or daughter's daughter or somebody related to you, and still manage next day to think about the future, think about your children, think about their own livelihoods? And I think it is the Dalits who have not given up on loving that we have had a civilization that is existing in India. But the day the Dalits will give up on loving, you will read reports of civil wars coming from India. They have every reason to take up arms. They have every reason to blow the system up, because that has not been conditioning them. If every day 4 Dalit women are raped, which civilizational society promotes such kind of impunities? They have every right to fight, but they are not fighting. And I think this is not their weakness, but this is their greatness. But this greatness is taken as a weakness, and that's why repeated forms of oppressions are taking place. Currently, now in Delhi, 27 Muslims have been dead so far. Muslims and other religions, of course. There is a communal violence taking place right in the capital. But here's the funny thing, how the right wing uses Dalit bodies. There was a pogrom happened in 2002. I'll just give you statistics. Way back in 2002, a communal violence between Hindus and Muslims took place. And this is where I want you to understand how caste took place. The people who were convicted of crime against Muslims were approximately 1,500. Of them, only 36 belonged to the upper caste. The rest of them belonged to the Dalits or the other backward caste background. But the people in the position of power, every other political party in India is run by a Brahmin, whatever framework you call. The communists are Brahmins. Yechuri who's the General Secretary of Communist Party right now. He is a Brahmin from Andhra Pradesh. The Congress is a Brahmin party. BJP is another Brahmin party. Even in the opposition, the Brahmins rule. Yet, we do not talk about the representation of Brahmins into these various folds. What happens is one scaffolds into ideologies. So once you are either communist or your caste doesn't matter, no, it does matter. But by hiding one's caste privileges, what one does is doesn't identify the enemy as such. So recently, there was an attack that was that one young boy in India who was trying to shoot protesters in the capital. Now everybody went and talked about Hindu terror. I know, that boy had a caste. He was a Brahmin. Just call it a Brahmin terror. Call it what it is. And recently, for the recent crimes that we are facing right now in New Delhi, the guy responsible for perpetrating the attack, anybody has any guess, the name? Kapil? Mishra is a Brahmin. By hiding the caste privileges and the dialogues on caste, what happens is you take upon all these poor working class oppressed people into its fold. And neoliberal economy has given an opportunity for one to be more identitarian, yet hide one's identity privileges. And therefore, today or anyway, when you will have a conversation about this part of the region, which is extremely brutal and it is not peaceful, it was never peaceful. It continues to perpetuate everyday civil wars in villages. The Dalits are the minority in India, and they are placed in such a critical position that every space they occupy in villages, in semi-urban areas or in urban areas, they remain minority. And because they are in minority, they are vulnerable to crime. They are vulnerable to receiving crime. The people who perpetrate crime upon them do not come in same numbers. It is poor families who are on the outskirts of the villages who do not even have access to basic resources like water and every other things. Yet, the people who perpetuate horrendous crime upon them are the people who are majority numbers. Dalit bravado is used against them by making them criminals of the state. And that's why we have so many Dalits lying in the prison. And I think it is up to us all, as we think about this issue, I wanted to make a statement that caste really does matter. And it should matter in the sense not afflicting one group particularly, but across the spectrum that is in India. Thank you.
Is it different? Oh, thank you very much. All I did was salute you for being here, saluting each and every one of you and saying how blessed we are to have our dear brother here with such eloquence. Eloquence is wisdom speaking, such vision, such courage, such willingness to focus on veritas, truth. And that condition of truth is allowing suffering to speak, no matter whose suffering it is. And it brings a very special joy to my own heart because it's been now exactly 3 years and 2 months when I first set eyes on my dear brother. He already had a PhD from University in South Africa. But in the class of the boys we talked about, and you and Mordecai and the others, we had a wonderful time together. And I knew that he was already a force for intellectual, moral good. But I had no idea he was going to write an instant classic just 3 years later, become a bestseller, not just in India, but around the world. So when he asked me to write the foreword for Caste Matters connected to my own, much less important work, Race Matters, I said, I jump at the possibility of doing that. because very much like the Roma in Europe, very much like our indigenous peoples, the black peoples, the brown peoples, the working class peoples, the poor peoples here or around the world, there is a new day in the freedom struggle of oppressed people, which means there's a new day for the Dalit struggle for freedom. It casts a spotlight on it. It becomes unavoidable, inescapable. You have to have some response to it. Very much like apartheid, South Africa in the 1960s. All of a sudden now, you've got to have some orientation, sensibility, attitude, action toward it. We went through the same struggle in El Salvador in the 1980s. We're wrestling right now with market-driven prisons and fossil fuel, a host of other kinds of issues. Concerned about what? Concerned about crimes against humanity. What we just heard are crimes against humanity. And I come out of particular traditions. I come out of the Socratic legacy of Athens, which believes in serious, critical questioning of assumptions and presuppositions like the dogma of Brahman's superiority vis-a-vis our precious, priceless Dalit brothers and sisters. I come out of the prophetic legacy of Jerusalem, the genius of Hebrew scripture, that essay, the spreading of that steadfast love, that loving kindness to the orphan, the widow, the fatherless, the motherless, the oppressed, the persecuted, the subjugated, the dominated. Not just to be talked about, but to act on, which is to say, to be in genuine solidarity with the precious brothers and sisters that we have seen our dear brother Suraj talk about. We want to salute your mother Rahimi, brother Wendeling too, because we are who we are because somebody loved us. But he could not be sitting here as that small slice of precious Dalit humanity without the Dalit love that has gone into them and to him. Saru too, granduncle, on and on and on. And of course that's true for each and every one of us. In terms of the love that has gone into the shaping and molding of who we are. Where did we get the sources of our self-confidence, our self-respect, our self-regard? And you didn't get it just by being born. Somebody had to take time to tend to you, to care for you. That's what he means by Dalit love, not just isolated acts. He's talking about a whole wave of 3,000 years of a hated people who in the face of that hatred have been able to dish out Dalit love, and you're looking at a Dalit love warrior, justice warrior right here. Give it up for this brother. Give it up for this brother. That's what we're talking about. That's what we're talking about. And one of the many things that bring us together is the fact that I have been blessed to come from a people of a great tradition, of black people who were hated for 400 years. The dish out love warriors too. So when we talk about John Coltrane's Love Supreme together, we got a whole lot of overlap. When we listen to Stevie Wonder's Love and the Need of Love, we got a whole lot of overlap. We listen to Ray Charles, we listen to Aretha Franklin. When we read Martin Luther King Jr. and James Baldwin and Toni Morrison, when mother love itself becomes a killer of your own child, what kind of love is that? Well, that's another evening, another seminar. But it's still part of the love. Still part of the love tradition. And that justice tied to that love. Love in public is what justice is all about. It's like that tenderness in private. It was what love is all about. He comes from a tender people, that rub of his grandmother on his hand. That's not just cerebral. That's not abstract intellectual reflection. That's critical intelligence and love of a Dalit woman who by means of skin to skin, touch to touch, soul to soul, gives him some sense of empowerment. I can bear witness to the same thing of Lovey Gwen and T. Rose, my grandmama on the chocolate side of town in Sacramento, California. Hence the overlap. But the overlap is not just skin pigmentation. It is a fundamental commitment to integrity, honesty, decency, generosity, love, and willingness to speak the truth and seek justice before the worms get our bodies. That's what also brings us together, and I'm sure that's why all of you all have come as well. So I'm going to stop and raise one question, though. Could you say something about that powerful last chapter of yours with Sister Bandita and the others, where you talk about the Brahmin brothers and sisters who are willing to fight against Brahmin supremacy, like John Brown, Vanilla Brother, willing to die for these chocolate people. What kind of love goes into that Vanilla Brother, or Dorothy Day, or Rabbi Hasho, or Grace Boggs? Well, he's a black brother. I'm just thinking about the white brothers right now. You know what I don't know. You ahead of me. You running ahead of me, my dear sister. No, we focus just for a second on these vanilla folk. They cutting up against white supremacy. This is very important. Why is that important? It's important because this is not a matter of tribalism. This is the primacy of the moral and the spiritual with political consequences, with an analysis of domination, rooted in predatory capitalism, rooted in patriarchy, rooted in homophobia, transphobia, with religious rationalizations of vicious forms of hierarchy. All of these elements going into the making of this crime against humanity. But say some, maybe just a brief thing about that last chapter, and then we can open it up for questions.
Thank you. Thank you for that, glaring comments and compliments. Caste is not only existing among Dalits, and I think that's why I said the fetishization of the Dalit body and the Dalit oppression is so NGOized, in the market of this Dalit body. Brahmin itself group has more than 550 subcaste and sub-subcaste. They don't look eye to eye each other when it comes to interpersonal relationships. One has to really go back. That's why we have this overly romanticized term of arranged marriages. What is arranged marriage? It's a subcaste marriage, where the family is making sure that the person doesn't only belong to the same caste but subcaste. To try to find the lineage, so they can marry within the same, because the idea of purity is there. So it just happens, I was talking to a Brahmin friend, and his wife was also Brahmin, but they said they had a family struggle to get married. And I couldn't understand. I said, why would you elope from your house when you belong to, especially in India, the love marriage is basically between different castes or different religion, and basically you have to run after your life, because the society and the family is after your throat. Then he explained to me that he belonged to a different Brahmin subcaste, and she belonged to a different Brahmin subcaste. They couldn't get married. It was just not a possible option, so they had to leave, and I met them in South Africa, where of course they had kids and they're thriving, and I was like, what about the caste oppression that takes amongst Brahmins? We need to pay attention to that angle too, because it's a caste problem too. And that's how I began my investigation, and I found so many courageous Brahmin voices fighting against the Brahmins. They chose to take on certain responsibility to fight against the order that they belong. They didn't want to come and do patronization kind of work in the Dalit circles, but they took a moral stand and they say, you know what, they fought with their own relatives, they fought with their own kinds. And these are the people who stood by the legendary figures of Indian struggle, Ambedkar and Phule's of 19th century, who were fighting against this. And their comrades, they opened their spaces, they utilized their privileges to go and talk to one of the relatives who happened to be a commissioner in one of the municipal corporations. And hey, you know what, I need a favor to ask. And because of the Brahmin connection, and they had the relatives connected, it worked out. So the Brahmins had put themselves in front also, but unfortunately, the Brahmins are also so crooked people that they didn't share these stories amongst their own kind, amongst their own offspring. These people who were anti-caste Brahmins do not at all feature, even in the spiritual realm. So in South India, there is a religion that's basically called Lingayat. is a religion that has separated from Hinduism, and it identifies itself as a new religion. It has a significant following in that state, and also, of course, across India. The founder was a Brahmin. Yet the Brahmins disowned him. So a revolutionary Brahmin is not the part of canon of the regular Brahmins in the society. Similarly, various progressive non-Hindu or non-Brahminic sects and religious traditions that came about, many of them had Brahmins as their figures who rebelled against him. Even Buddha's, the first 5 students, 2 of them, I think 2 or 3, were Brahmins, who chose not to be at the side of oppressor, rather follow the human path. And so my thing is, when are these Brahmins going to be, as I call, cultural suicide bombers? We don't want them just to be, the nicey word, WhatsApp or Facebook post, Twitter. We want them to be cultural suicide bombers. We want them to use their cultural privileges and blow up into the spaces where I don't have access. As I've told repeatedly, I can't enter a temple or a sanctum sanctorium in some important places. They will ask about my caste, they'll ask about my background. Temples in India, we don't have toilets, but we have temples. This is the kind of, it's an epidemic. And they are single-handedly run by Brahmins. There was an attempt to recruit Dalit as the priests. It fell out. One of the reasons I see amongst African American struggle is Martin Luther King Jr. could utilize the institution of church. Malcolm X could utilize the institution of mosque to go deeper. We never had that access. We never had those avenues open for us. So what I want, for example, in the Brahmin and Brahminism is, you got to go into that space and start making even a voice, rather, I'm not even expecting more, that will start questioning your own position in an unequal society. You can't be happy and you can't be living in a so-called utopia when people are dying on a daily basis for the very reason that you are having your privileges. And when we talk about this, immediately there is a defense among the people who belong to this caste, where they always throw the ball into the court of the oppressed by saying, you guys are not doing enough. You guys are having, it's always oppressed who has to constantly define. Well, the privileged ones seldom do a retrospection.
I think we should open it up. Questions, queries, you got a question, I think, sister?
Yes, that was great, right? I don't know much about India, so this is kind of good for me, but I did know they had a caste system, and I know in America, right, well, my experience is we're judged by either color, things that come out, your color, the blacker, the lighter, or Muslims, you could tell by their dress that they're Muslims. So what I wanted to know is, in India, how can you, I don't know about India, so how do you differentiate with the caste system? How can you tell? And then another thing I wanted to say was that it's so powerful here that I've been reading the banner, and that the minority police officers in Boston are fighting against had a disagreement against their local union guy who said because the minority police, who I'm assuming are black, was sticking up for the the young adults who came out with the millions, with the Black Lives Matter, so that's how powerful, color can differentiate into the unions, you know what I'm saying? So my question is, about how do you differentiate, I don't know, because I've never been to India. And one more question, thank you for correcting me about democracy, because LL Cool J has this song, The Power of God. It's not about being black or white, it's about being right.
Thank you so much, my dear sister. She got a whole lot on the table for you. You got some deep stuff here going on.
India is a rural country, meaning more than 74% population lives in rural area. So in villages, because it's a closed community, Everybody knows who is belonging to what caste. Second identifier is your last name. Your last name is your caste name. And in some societies where they have given up on the last names, yet people have found creative ways to identify what caste one belongs to. Just because if I know what caste the person next sitting me is belonging to, then I can have certain relations. I can talk about I will briefly tell this incident in railway station. In railways in India is they were saying even I think Marx had this thought that railways will challenge the caste system because everybody will club together and who will know. And it just so happened Marx's theory was slightly correct but then this guy failed Marx, where this guy was sitting next to me. And Indian railways, the best pastime is you just talk about each other's life. You don't know the person, but you just go deep. And this guy was something 50 plus, started talking about his own family problems. And almost like a therapy session. I mean, it was a 2-hour conversation. I was listening, and then he talked about his addictions and everything. Yeah. And then I thought, let me just ask this. I said, you never asked my full name as of yet, and would that impact? And he said, if I would have asked, I would have never shared this information. So he was very particular that he will share this information with an anonymous person without something registering into his head that he was talking to a person belonging to a certain caste. I think that's how these relationships are even built, and relationships are broken, because of this very fact.
Thank you. I have 2 quick questions. One is about Islam, for example, right? So Islam is like a confessional identity. You confess to be in Islam. You're not born Muslim, right? You confess, you become Muslim. I'm not Muslim, but that's how you become Muslim, right? So how you take a separate identity. Malcolm X took a separate identity by becoming Muslim. So why did caste persist in Islam? Because, for example, for 700 years, the ruling structure was not with the Brahmin kings. I mean, some part of India, but most part, bigger part of India. But still caste persists, right? So how did caste persist in confessional identity? That's question number 1. And the second question is a little bit tricky. So you talked about Dalit law, right? Isn't it also slightly essentializing, or and the same accusation as Gandhi spiritualizing manual scavenging? So why do we have to, why do you romanticize this Dalit law? Why? Because we want to get rid of the oppressor, right? We want to, and of course, set up a new system where the oppressor doesn't have the agency to act out. So isn't Dalit law in a way is like kind of a reactionary proposition? But yeah, that's it.
Thank you. On the first question, see, this is the Brahmin genius. India was colonized repeatedly, by the Islamic forces, different regions. Even before Islamic, we had all kinds of oppressors. What they did was they assimilated with the power structure. So when Islam was ruling, the councils were primarily under the so there was this negotiation that we will you can rule upon these masses if you let the caste system intact, because if you want to rule, you have to control the labor of the people, and the people who are already conditioned according to a certain thinking. Why would you want to go and mess? And this is one of the failures of Islam in India, that although it talked about this universal brotherhood, it talked about and it professed, but it didn't reach the lowest masses. It didn't make any effort to abolish untouchability. If 700 years of Islam in India, if it was there and if it was really a vision that it was promising, untouchability should have been abolished for so long that it was there. But it cooperated with the Brahminic caste system. And I think that's how we see Islam thriving. And because of that, within the Islam, the Sayyid caste, which is basically a priest caste, continues to be the hegemonic force. So whenever you have people giving sermons about political Islam or so forth, we should ask to talk. We should probe them more to talk about the Sayyids, the dominant caste equivalent Brahmins within the Islam, who continue their position without being self-challenged. As your question about Dalit love, I think it's more radical than how we imagine, because what happens is, again, when we hear the love, it is being so it is contaminated by the market forces. that love just becomes a very tricky word. For me, what I'm saying is it's a warning. And this is a humane love warning. At some point, this has got to end. And as we all know, the oppressors are not going to end this. It's the oppressed who are going to end this. But it is, again, the repetition of this love ethic that people have to understand that has kept them alive. Right? Had it been upon, had there been no love, or whatever way we understand love, but the way I see the love is not a single word. It goes with Dalit love, which means it goes with the history. It goes with my ancestral, kind of upbringings. It goes with the lived reality of Dalit. And alongside that, if there is a love, then it has a different meaning. It becomes it becomes a rebellious category. It becomes a challenging norm, as well as it becomes a space where you really want to go and actually fight out the oppressor. So within that idea, of course, Professor West, kept talking about his people of 400 years of slaves, and yet taught the world how to love. Right? And I think this is very precise. And when we look at it, that's again not essentializing. That's actually saying that we have given birth to new civilizations. And within that Dalit love, what I make an argument is we have been at the crux of whatever new came about. Had we not been there with our ethic, which is humanitarian in its place, we would not even have imagined what we say, the romanticized thought of how we see India as today.
Well, one way of saying that is, if our precious Dalit brothers and sisters were terrorizing non-Dalits the way they have been terrorized, there'd be no ending. There'd be civil war of generation. In the same way, black people in the United States. If we had decided in our dominant leadership to be black version of the Ku Klux Klan, there'd be a civil war of generation. You see. So India itself ought to give the Dalit brothers and sisters a standing ovation for India to exist, just like white brothers and sisters in America ought to give black people a standing ovation. Thank you for Martin King. Thank you for A. Philip Randolph. Thank you for Harriet Tubman. There could have been black versions of the Klan. Because most people who get terrorized, they want to terrorize back. Most people who are treated unjust, they want revenge. They don't want justice. That has not been the dominant response of black people in the United States. The leaven in the U.S. loaf, spiritually, morally. That has not been the case of Dalit brothers and sisters. Leaven in the Indian loaf in that way. Now we're just talking about the best of these traditions. There's a history of black thugs and black gangsters. I tend to go back and forth depending on which day of the week. I got a lot of gangsters in me. Thank God for the Holy Ghost, but I'm a Christian. We won't get into that right now. But the same is true. There's a history of Dalit thugs and gangsters. Human beings are human beings. We are wretched folk as well as wonderful folk. That's the kind of species we are. Well, we got questions. Oh, we got to get ready.
Fascinating talk. I grew up in Bangladesh, and the way I learn about India is through movie industry, right? So Bollywood is huge, and I'm guessing in other parts of the world too, like the way we get exposed to Indian culture and ideas is through movies. And last time I checked, the Bollywood, like it's run by Brahmins. All the actors are like 95, 99% of all the Brahmins. So how, do you have any idea how this concept of Dalit love can get, how are we going to know about, the concept of this caste if it's not being exposed in the biggest propaganda machine which is out there, in the movie industry, and any
Thank you for that. I had a slide, but I removed it because I was thinking like this question should not come, but it came because this is the biggest export that India has done since basically as its diplomatic export. It exported Bollywood, especially Bollywood, Hindi-speaking cinema to the rest of the world. Of course, there are other cinemas too. It's very interesting that, and I'm writing this piece for a magazine called Baffler. In this, I kind of chart out. But when you open an Indian cinema, you see the idea of, especially what is loving other person. And the whole movie is about this person trying to just get married. So for the 3 hours, there's a song, there's a storyline, there's everything. You don't see this much here in this kind of, in this kind, because it's a straightforward thing. You like somebody, just, that's fine. Just go on drinks and just figure that. Here, well, in case of Bollywood, you have to find out what caste that person is, what class they belong to, what region it is, will the parents accept. And I think this whole parental kind of supervision upon regulating caste has given birth to this kind of. And so when you see marriages, for example, in India, they belong to, I think most likely, especially the Hindi Bollywood, belonging to a caste from Punjab. They have these kinds of marriages. And because the film industry was ruled by this Khatri caste for so long, they have basically brought their cultures. Now, I will tell you, never in my life have I seen any movie that has a mainstream film character that is like me, that has a social background like me, that lives like me, that fights like me, that breathes like me, that eats like me. No. So this cultural industry has robbed me of my own identity. So I feel ashamed. That's why I cannot own myself up. But here's the paradox. When an African American, for example, Denzel Washington goes to Bollywood, every Bollywood bigwig is genuflecting to this, and talking about how greatness it is, and how black people have made an impact with cinema industry. But these oxymorons couldn't even think about the same reality that they could have, even reflected. So they are so afraid. So Dalit's story did feature, but it featured as a class angle. That was talking about a poor person, not talking about a poor Dalit. So when they talk about the life of a slum-dwelling person, now tell me how many Brahmins live in slums? The slum living or a person who is working class is basically most likely Dalit or belongs to that background. But they never ever gave an identity for a Dalit, a rebellious identity for a Dalit. We never had a film that could, that could give us, and also food, for example. The food is vegetarian food, most likely. Again, consumed by the upper echelons of these people. We eat beef, we eat pork, we eat all kinds of foods. That is never part of that cuisine. Even the cooking shows that we have in India, the most they can go is chicken. And the spices they use this is again, I will tell you, I will watch on TV these things, and I will always hope I will eat someday food like this. Because that's how aspirational food is. It doesn't taste, it tastes like a meat. It doesn't have that spices, it doesn't have. So the majority of the Dalits or the indigenous Indians, the Adivasis, their culture, their festivals, their celebrations are not part of it. And many festivals that are Hindu in its construct are anti-Dalit or anti-native people. Like you have the Columbus Day and the whole horrid history. Similarly, when we celebrate Holi, have you ever asked, what is it about? It is a celebration of a burning of a native woman. Holika was her name. She, according to the Hindu scripture, is a demon. And my ancestors have been written into the Hindu religious text as asuras, as the demons. And the devas, the gods, are the ones who belong to the upper caste. And that's why I cannot even look for inspiration in the religious text, because my ancestors are presented as demons, as wretched, despicable beings. So I'm not even celebrating my ancestors, I am disowning in the same breath. And I think this is what this whole film industry, and one of the classic examples is Priyanka Chopra. Coming from a highly elite upper caste family, comes here and talks about South Asian women doesn't have much characters. I mean, come on. This brown woman tries to sell her brown skin under this whole, Hollywood, program. Never ever even ushers a voice about the same sort of discrimination that takes place in our society. And I think this is a very sensible space that these kind of thugs operate into, and then they are sold under this American dream that we have in current society.
Hi. Thank you for this really important work and your ongoing activism. I have 3 questions. That mic doesn't seem to be working.
Or just speak.
Okay, can you hear me now? Better? Yeah? Okay, yeah, thanks for your really important work, your activism, and the book. I have 3 questions. I think the two are short, and one is a sort of longer, more speculative question. So the first question is, are there internal divisions among Dalits? For instance, is there colorism? Are there certain kinds of stratification within the Dalit community? The second question is Narendra Modi and his impact on Dalit politics. And I asked this question because I encountered a South Asian man working at Google in New York, and it turned out that he was from a Dalit background, he had said, but it was light-skinned. And when I asked him what he thought about the sort of self-burning that some of the Dalit caste individuals were doing in protests at elite Indian universities, and sort of Modi's attitudes to Dalits, he wasn't critical of Modi at all. And he seemed to say that there's been economic opportunity that's been created under Modi for some members of the lower castes, and that it seems like I sort of concluded from that some of the mobility that some members of lower caste backgrounds are enjoying under Modi is blunting, perhaps, sort of Dalit resistance. So that was the second question. And I guess the third question is, sorry for so many questions. The third question is, how is migration shaping Dalit mobilization and anti-Dalit mobilization? I mean, so for instance, there are all of these elite South Asians who come from upper castes who are for Trump, and occupy spaces in elite universities who perhaps deny casteism as an issue in India. So, thanks for answering.
Thank you. I will be very brief so we can get more questions. Thank you. I will begin with the last provocation. I think we need to identify the South Asian caste-wise people and their political inclination in America. What kind of caste people support Trump or Modi or the right-wing politics or the left-wing politics? Because based upon that, South Asia again becomes like the Hindu identity. We don't know who is performing. And I think that research really needs to be urgently done, or else we will continue to fall into this again and trap. See, Ambedkar was a big promoter of migration. He said urbanization, because villages are the cesspool. Dalits live at the mercy of landlord. The landlord who controls, land and everything that belongs on land, including the human beings and the cattle. So he said, you better go to urban areas. But what happens in urbanization? When Dalits leave villages, they occupy the lowest position. They become the beggars of modern cities. They become beggars of Bombay, become beggars of New Delhi. You will see them on the streets hustling their kids. You will see that you see in the cinemas and all who are begging on the streets. These are mostly Dalits, because the society in the urban areas have not totally assimilated them the way it should have been. And then these are the people who are working as construction workers, or these are the same people who are working in the lowest paying job where they don't have any insurance, any surety. And the reason I know so intimately is because my neighbor left where I came from, my town, and went to a big city. And when I went to see them in big city, they were living in a hut. And that hut was basically, barely a house. If it rains, basically they don't have anything else. And they became the construction workers. They became the urban, the kind of urban labor, and who literally had no protection at all. So I think the migration, even though it should have helped, has not adequately helped. Talking about the divisions amongst Dalits, it is as everywhere else. There are amongst themselves so many castes, and also there are so many class sensibilities that I take in this book. Yes, I talk on Dalit middle class. I talk about how Dalit middle class is too much enamored with the neoliberal visions that they are shown in the dreams. You will one day become same like capitalist dream that is sold here for every middle class. And I think it's not the Dalit only, it's the predicament of every middle class in every society, especially capital-oriented society that doesn't pay attention, I think, to these things. But also amongst Dalits, there is this new capitalist kind of enterprise people are trying to think, will capitalism liberate? And I think it's a good experiment. So far, I don't think it has provided credible, because what they're asking Dalit capitalists is, take the leftovers. As and that's not capitalism, and that's not going to help. And I think that's how I try to highlight this issue in this book, which is again a critical reflection of, also on the Dalits. That's why, I get critique from all the sides because of that position.
So we have time for one more question before the book signing.
Here, I have a question.
Let's take maybe two.
Suraj, thank you. It was great stuff. My question is that I was just answering my friend yesterday, be it BJP or Congress or any other government, no government is going to uplift the Dalits. So it's not going to happen. As you said, it was ruled by whoever. But my point is, how much can Dalits uplift themselves? Can they actually think that can education be a medium where they can somehow push themselves, propel themselves in the education line and get to a job of respect and try to change their, next generations and over the generations. It's not going to happen overnight, but I don't believe any government will lift them. But can they do something for themselves?
Thank you. I think, that's why my demand is Dalits are made the rentiers of India government. We don't own anything. We are basically paying the rent, paying taxes, and we don't have resources. My demand is we want land, because the land that has been snatched away from us, and there is a law actually in place. Yet the feudal lords, the feudal caste own about, it's unimaginable that one individual family owns 100 acres of land. That's criminal act according to a law. Dalits remain most vulnerable because they don't have any resources that they can, stand on. That is one basic thing. And I think relying on someone else is never going to help, because they are only going to, I was just telling this example, somebody was asking me, so how do we then, eradicate basically this example? And I said, can you imagine, for example, you want your children to get best education. You want your children to, have enrolled in, every other musical programs, and have extracurricular activities. You want them to, excel and thrive, and you want them to go to Ivy League. Would you expect the same for the person who's working as your chauffeur or as your maid? And the answer most likely is, I want them to be educated only to a level that they don't become competitor to my own offsprings. Because these people know their children are not talented enough. Why would you avoid a competition of any sort? If you're smart, and if you're buried in the idea of meritocracy, let it be a level playing field. But what they do is the whole institutions have created the psychological barrier upon the Dalits, where Dalits are constantly told, and I have been told up until my PhD even now, that I'm not smart enough, I'm not meritorious enough. And I have to constantly do one extra thing to show that, I'm here, but also I have done this, that's why maybe I'm here. Not by the virtue. So the notion of belongingness will, and that's why we are saying this is a Brahminical structure. And unless and until we abolish it.
Yeah, one thing that I was struggling actually for past 2 weeks is like one of the students died in Telangana. I'm just trying to see if they can ignore this a little bit, not entirely getting into their system that, I belong to this lowest and then I cannot propel somehow. People are saying this and that, differentiating me. Can you ignore that a little bit and then focus?
But how do we ignore? See, one of the things, because you don't have your heroes and sheroes that you see every day. Your icons are in prisons. Or your icons are getting beaten by police. Why would you want to associate with someone who is a social outlaw? You don't open a cinema and see, he's a Dalit. At least in a way, comparatively, African Americans had at least those icons that they could look up to. You tell me, who are your icons? You don't know anybody. Even your father is being berated as someone who's a drunkard or who doesn't take care of his family. You don't even have your interpersonal icon. That's why it's you and me who have to become the icons of our communities. Because our people need to draw inspiration from us. There is nobody else. And many of our inspirations are dead. And it's very few places where you can actually look up and feel confident about yourself. That's why I'm so aggressive about my identity. I want my people, especially living in small places, the middle class, have problem and advocate for this issue. Hey man, why do you always talk about Dalits and themselves Dalits? Because they would like to get away from this, and they are the psychological slaves. Because they remain psychological untouchables. I am not. I refuse to be the untouchable of the society. And that's why I think it's people like you, me, and many others who can be the icons where people can immediately relate to. A Brahmin cannot be an icon. A Brahmin is one who is oppressing us, has been constantly oppressing us from childhood. How can he and she be a model? But Brahmins and other castes have these people as their icons. So even if we try, this system is not for us. We have to create our own universe, and this universe is within our families, within our circles, within our own extended networks. Unless we create an alternative universe for ourselves, for our sanity. It's not this capitalist networking only, but a space where you can feel more human, more belong, without being judged, without being berated, without being denied any kind of possibility. Just be who you are. I think that spaces are someone we have already. We have just not made it a conversational space. We have not looked this space as a habitual space, as someone, what both you call as, habitus, where we can feel as we have created this. And I think this creation of a universe doesn't even belong, because Dalits were never creating anything. Yet we remain the most productive people. Whatever innovations we create, they have used the word in India called jugaad, which is basically an adjusting word. It's not. They don't talk about we are creating something. They don't talk about innovation. They don't talk about we inventing something. They say these people have adjusted something and created something. So even our innovation, invention, discoveries do not fit into the jargon of something that has contributed to the world. So again, then we remain dependent upon a pedagogy or ideology that doesn't, provide us enough.
Yeah, no, I love his light and his fire. I love his light and fire. But I just want to make this point before we end. We should never downplay the role of international solidarity. There is no American Revolution without the French.
Yeah.
There's no abolitionist movement in America without the abolitionist movement in England. Where did Frederick Douglass go? Where did Ida B. Wells go when they had bounties on their head? They went to their comrades in other parts of the world. There's no overcoming of vicious apartheid in South Africa without international solidarity. We could go on and on and on. But what does that international solidarity do? It besmirches the image of those who are perpetuating the crime in the form of lies. It discloses their hypocrisy and their inhumanity. It then attacks their entrenched interests. But then it also makes moral and spiritual witness, so that even among the ruling classes, there's always a slice of those who have conscience. So they can create conflict within their own ruling class. That's one of the reasons why I teach at Holi. Try to tell the truth to create conflict within ruling class formation. In the name of integrity, honesty, decency. They're human beings too, even at the top. That's why we love our dear brother Bernie. Oh yes, he understands that. Our dear brother Bernie understands that, but that's just a footnote. I'm just at that footnote. But what that does is unleash new possibilities when you have such candidates connected to international solidarity. Any form of oppression, domination, exploitation, occupation becomes a source of moral, spiritual witness in solidarity that weakens the structure of domination that's losing sight of the humanity of precious Dalits or Roma or anybody else anywhere we go. We got one last question.
Well, so you've almost taken the question, because my question to you is, how do Dalits organize, and is it only, because you were saying not through the temples, and so my question was, is it through going outside of India? And I'm reminded in 2001 when I was at the World Conference Against Racism. I was there and I saw Dalits with the signs that said casteism is racism, and I was like, no, indeed, racism is a form of casteism. It is the, yes, well, I think we saw each other, we had a conversation. And so we can talk a long time. We can talk a long time about the parallels. There are many questions. How do you in the U.S. now see racism and the parallels? And how is casteism acting out here among Indians in the U.S. and all of that? But I will leave with this one question. In my analysis of racism, which is casteism based on the social interpretation of phenotype as opposed to family name and all of that, I understand, and as you said, that it unfairly disadvantages some individuals and communities. It unfairly advantages other individuals and communities. You brought that up, that people aren't even seeing that in terms of casteism. But the third impact is often missed, and that is that all of these systems are sapping the strength of the whole society through the waste of human resources. And so I'm wondering, not only on the international thing, which was going to be part of it, but also how do we bring that?
Exactly. Thank you so much. It's a good close-up. You know, to believe on the last point, I was arguing with a upper caste person. I never call them upper caste, I call them criminal caste. They're the ones who commit criminal acts, you know. And so I was talking to this criminal caste person, and he goes like, you know, he's basically arguing against the affirmative action like policy we have in India called reservation. And I said, imagine, talking about labor force, right now how much money do you pay as tax? And he gave a certain number. And I said, imagine that times reducing 10. I mean, if you're paying 100, you're just paying $10. He just, you know, he never thought about that. He said, how is that possible? And I told, if you have more people participating in the workforce who you have disadvantaged, we have created policies, we have created barriers for them not to be your colleagues or not be someone who can work together. You are creating this huge gap, and that's why the whole brunt is coming on you, and you feel that you are paying taxes and your taxes are unfairly used because they are benefiting people through the, you know, reformation like policies that, you know, you have reservation and other funds. And I think that consciousness, it doesn't even feature because they are so obsessed and they are so insecure because they feel like they own this world and nobody has anything to do with this. I created this. I worked hard for this. I deserve this without doing nothing. Just by being, you know, almost like being a king, born to a queen and then become a king. And I think this kind of aristocratic anarchy that these people have brought repeatedly is, I think, a problem. And on the racism, I'll just tell you on the conference, and it might be shocking to many of you, caste-based discrimination continues to be the world's oldest surviving discrimination. Now, United Nations, the global body where you legislate and do sanctions, has not passed any resolution from General Assembly that condemns caste. They have not even acknowledged it. So United Nations becomes another neoliberal government body for a person like me, because for 70 plus years of existence, it has not even managed to entertain in its General Assembly or Security Council resolutions where they can actually admit. And that's why we are trying to create inroads for the world to know that 300 million people undergo everyday form of, you know, humiliation that this caste has brought upon it. And the government, especially the Indian government, plays its foul game. It doesn't allow us enough space to lobby. Just to give a comparative example, Israel and Palestine issue that has been, you know, almost, the reason I use this example is because the Indian independence and the constitution almost came about at the same time. More than 270 United Nations Security Council resolutions have been passed that conflicts the region, which is whatever million we have. 300 million people, legitimate reason for them to be, you know, recognized in these chambers, zero resolution. That's also we remain the most oppressed globally. Now, and that's why within the US circles, what we are trying to do is we are trying to create more solidarity through the networks. Professor Cornel has been a champion of this, has been, you know, talking about this, to let the world basically know that there are people who are existing there and they need your solidarity, they need your love, they need your support. And I think unless and until we make that case like we did with apartheid South Africa, we made the, you know, the world relevant for that. Similarly, apartheid exists in every villages in India. I think we have to take that call into the deep pockets of India. Thank you so much.